John Miller's days followed the quiet rhythm of routine. At 67, he found solace in the predictability of his life in the quaint suburb of Austin, Texas. Since his wife, Eleanor, had passed 5 years earlier, John had learned to embrace the silence of his home, though it often felt too vast and empty. His mornings began with a slow walk to the corner coffee shop, where he exchanged pleasantries with the barista, followed by hours spent tending his roses, their vibrant blooms a rare source of joy. Afternoons were for reading on the porch swing, where the creak of the chains accompanied his book, a soft reminder of the life he had shared with Eleanor. His 2 children, Maggie and Tom, lived in other states with their families. They called regularly, visited occasionally, and always promised to come by more often. John understood, life was busy, and though he cherished the visits, especially from his young grandchildren, Emily and Ethan, their laughter seemed fleeting, leaving his house even quieter after they left. One morning, as the scent of brewing coffee filled his kitchen, his phone buzzed on the counter. It was from his neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a lively woman who lived a few doors down. She often stopped by with homemade cookies or gardening tips. But today her message was different. Attached were a series of photos accompanied by a frantic text. "John, it's awful. There's a dog hanging from the roof of that blue-shuttered house down the street. I've called the police, but they aren't here yet. Can you help? The poor thing has been like this for almost an hour." John's hands trembled as he swiped through the images. A scrawny dog dangled from a 2-story roof, a rusty chain around its neck. Its legs flailed, its body suspended in an unnatural, heartbreaking way. The terror in the animal's eyes was palpable. Even through the screen, he felt the coffee grow cold in his cup as anger surged through him. How could someone let this happen? Without hesitation, he grabbed his jacket, leaving the comforts of his quiet morning behind, and headed out the door. As he approached the house with the blue shutters, he could see a small crowd gathered. Mrs. Henderson was there, wringing her hands in despair, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced with worry. "John, thank goodness you're here," she said, her voice trembling. "It's terrible. I can't believe anyone could be so cruel." John looked up. The dog was still there, its body limp and trembling. Its breaths were shallow, its tongue hanging out, and its fur matted with dirt. The scene was worse than he had imagined. "Has anyone tried to help?" John asked, his voice tinged with urgency. "The owner," Mrs. Henderson spat, gesturing toward the house. "He won't come out. Said it's his dog and none of our business." John marched to the door, his fists clenched. He banged loudly, his anger overriding any hesitation. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing a disheveled man with bloodshot eyes. "What do you want?" the man growled. "Your dog," John said, pointing toward the roof. "It's dying. Let us help." The man sneered. "It's just a dog. Leave it alone." The door slammed shut before John could respond. For a moment, he stood there, his knuckles white against the wooden door, anger boiling within him. How could someone be so heartless? "Does anyone have a ladder?" he called out to the crowd, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I do," a young man replied, jogging toward his truck. As they positioned the ladder against the side of the house, John felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. Every second mattered. Ignoring the homeowner's shouted protests, he climbed carefully, his focus entirely on the dog above. The closer he got, the more he could see the fear in the dog's eyes. Its body trembled, its breaths coming in quick, shallow gasps. "It's okay, boy," John murmured, reaching out a hand. "I'm here to help." The dog flinched but didn't resist as John gently placed his hand on its back. The chain around its neck was old and rusted, the clasp tightly wound. His hands worked quickly but carefully, every movement deliberate. "Call the police again," he shouted down to the crowd. "We need help now." In the distance, the faint wail of sirens broke through the tension. Relief washed over him as he realized help was finally on its way. Moments later, an officer climbed up the ladder with bolt cutters. Together, they freed the dog from the chain. John cradled the trembling animal in his arms, his heart breaking as he felt how frail it was. As he carried the dog down, the crowd erupted into applause. The poor creature collapsed on the grass, its ribs stark against its thin frame, its eyes dull but filled with a glimmer of hope. "You're safe now," John whispered, stroking its head gently. "No one will hurt you again." In that moment, amidst the chaos and relief, John felt something stir inside him, a connection to this fragile creature and an unshakable determination to give it the life it deserved. The wail of sirens faded as the officers led the disheveled owner of the blue-shuttered house to a waiting police car. John stood nearby, the rescued dog trembling at his feet, his heart pounding with residual adrenaline. The officers had quickly assessed the scene, arresting the man on charges of animal cruelty. The crowd began to disperse, though some lingered to express their gratitude to John. "Thank you for stepping up," Mrs. Henderson said, placing a hand on John's arm. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't acted." John nodded but said little, his focus entirely on the dog at his feet. Its thin frame and sunken eyes told a story of prolonged neglect. Its once white fur was grey with dirt, and its paws were cracked and raw. Despite its weakened state, the dog's eyes flickered with something John couldn't quite describe: gratitude, perhaps, or trust. An animal control officer approached, kneeling beside the dog with a soft, calming voice. She gently ran her hands over the trembling body, assessing its condition. "He's severely malnourished and dehydrated," she said, her tone somber. "This little guy has been through a lot. He'll need immediate medical attention." "I'll take him," John said without hesitation. The officer looked at him, surprised but pleased. "Are you sure? He'll need a lot of care and patience." John's response was firm. "I can give him that." Carefully, John lifted the dog into his car, wrapping him in an old blanket he kept in the trunk. The short drive to the nearest animal hospital was filled with silence, save for the dog's labored breathing. John's mind raced with thoughts of how someone could inflict such suffering on an innocent creature. The veterinarian on duty, a kind woman with gentle hands and a reassuring smile, examined the dog thoroughly. "He's lucky to be alive," she said, shaking her head. "Severe malnutrition, dehydration, and some signs of organ strain. We'll need to keep him here for a few days to stabilize him." John nodded, his heart heavy as he watched the staff carefully lift the dog onto a padded bed. For the first time in years, he felt a surge of protectiveness that reminded him of the early days of fatherhood. "Can I visit him?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Of course," the veterinarian replied. "A familiar face will do him good." Over the next several days, John became a regular visitor at the animal hospital. He spent hours at the dog's side, speaking to him in soothing tones, reading aloud from the newspaper, and offering gentle pats of reassurance. The dog, now named Chance by the staff, began to respond to John's kindness. His eyes, once dull, started to brighten, and his tail wagged faintly whenever John approached. When the vet finally declared Chance fit enough to leave, John's heart swelled. He brought the dog home, creating a cozy bed in his living room and filling it with soft blankets and a few new toys. Chance's recovery was slow but steady. Under John's care, he began to gain weight. His fur grew soft and glossy, and his steps became more confident, though still nervous around loud noises or sudden movements. Chance followed John everywhere, his eyes constantly seeking the reassurance of his presence. In time, their routines intertwined. Mornings began with short walks in the crisp air, and afternoons were spent in the backyard, where Chance explored every corner with curious delight. Evenings found them curled up on the couch, Chance's head resting on John's lap as they watched old westerns. John hadn't realized how much his life had been missing until Chance entered it. For years, he'd been living in a quiet shadow of grief. His days marked by routine rather than joy. But with Chance, there was laughter again, gentle at first, then hearty and full. As the days turned to weeks, John found himself smiling more often, the heaviness in his chest lifting bit by bit. He realized that in saving Chance, he had unknowingly saved himself. The bond they shared, born from pain and perseverance, became a beacon of hope, a testament to the healing power of love. The transformation in Chance was nothing short of miraculous. His once emaciated body filled out with healthy weight, and his fur, now soft and shiny, gleamed in the sunlight. His spirit, though scarred by his past, began to shine through in small, heartwarming moments. John often marveled at the little things that brought Chance joy, the way he pounced on fallen leaves during their morning walks, the wag of his tail when John tossed a ball, and the contented sighs as he dozed by the fire on chilly evenings. But their journey wasn't without challenges. Chance's past trauma lingered, manifesting in moments of fear and uncertainty. Loud noises, like the rumble of a passing truck or a neighbor's sudden shout, would send him scurrying under the couch, trembling. John learned to be patient, speaking to him in calm, steady tones until he felt safe enough to emerge. One stormy evening, as thunder rolled through the Pasadena sky, Chance had a particularly bad episode. He paced anxiously, his tail tucked tightly against his body, despite John's reassurances and the snug comfort of the thundershirt he'd purchased. Chance whimpered and refused to settle. John sat on the floor beside him, stroking his fur and murmuring, "It's okay, boy. I'm here. You're safe now." Slowly, Chance rested his head on John's lap, his breathing evening out. Moments like these deepened their bond. They weren't just owner and pet, they were companions, each leaning on the other for strength. John's neighbors, who had once only nodded politely in passing, took notice of the change in him. They stopped to chat during his walks with Chance, asking about the dog's progress and sharing their own stories of rescue pets. Mrs. Henderson, whose photos had set everything in motion, often brought over homemade treats for Chance, her face lighting up as she watched him devour them with gusto. "You've given him a second chance," she said one afternoon, "and it seems he's done the same for you." John nodded, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. Chance had not only filled the void left by Mary's passing but had also rekindled John's connection with the community around him. Despite their growing happiness, John couldn't shake a nagging worry. What would happen to Chance if something happened to him? At 68, John was acutely aware of his mortality. He began to think long-term, wanting to ensure that Chance would always be cared for. He started making calls, reaching out to local animal shelters and rescues for advice. One shelter staff member suggested fostering as a way to introduce Chance to a larger network of potential adopters. While the idea pained John, he couldn't imagine parting with Chance. He knew it was a responsible step. "I'll foster him," John agreed, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. "But only if I'm sure it's the right fit." The decision marked a turning point in their journey. For now, they had each other, and John vowed to make every moment count. Together, they would face whatever came next. As the days turned into weeks, John's commitment to finding the right home for Chance became a mission. He continued fostering him while working closely with the local shelter. Together, they organized adoption events, hoping to find the perfect family who could offer Chance not just safety, but love and understanding. Every event was both hopeful and bittersweet for John. He watched Chance interact with potential adopters, wagging his tail hesitantly but always staying close to John as if seeking reassurance. Though some showed genuine interest, John could sense when they weren't the right fit. His bond with Chance had given him a deep understanding of the dog's needs, a quiet, patient home where his scars could continue to heal. One crisp autumn afternoon, a young couple named Sarah and Mark arrived at the shelter. They had recently lost their Labrador to old age and were searching for another dog to welcome into their lives. When they met Chance, their approach was different from many others. Rather than overwhelming him with excitement, they crouched down to his level, speaking softly and offering gentle hands for him to sniff. Chance, usually reserved with strangers, leaned into Sarah's touch, his tail wagging tentatively. John watched the interaction from a distance, his heart tightening. He could see how naturally Sarah and Mark connected with Chance, their movements thoughtful and unhurried. After they spent nearly an hour getting to know him, the shelter staff invited John to share more about Chance's history. Sitting together, John recounted the story of Chance's rescue, how he had been on the brink of death, and how their journey had brought them both back to life. He was honest about Chance's anxieties, emphasizing the need for patience and understanding. Sarah and Mark listened intently, their expressions filled with compassion. When Sarah spoke, her voice was steady but emotional. "We've both experienced loss, and we understand how trauma leaves its mark," she said. "We want to give Chance a home where he feels safe and loved." After a thorough screening process, the shelter approved their application. The day of the adoption came quickly, and John found himself struggling with conflicting emotions. He knew this was the best decision for Chance, but the thought of letting him go weighed heavily on his heart. As Sarah and Mark loaded Chance into their car, they assured John he could visit anytime. "You'll always be part of his life," Mark promised. Chance looked back at John from the back seat, his soulful eyes filled with what John could only describe as gratitude. John waved as they drove away, a tear rolling down his cheek. The house felt unbearably quiet without Chance's presence. John missed their morning walks, the comforting weight of Chance's head on his lap, and the unspoken companionship that had filled his days. But amidst the sadness, there was peace. Chance was safe, loved, and on a path to happiness. John resolved to stay involved with the shelter, volunteering his time to help other animals in need. Though his home was empty, his heart remained full, knowing that Chance's story was just beginning. Part 5. The weeks after Chance's adoption felt quieter, but John kept himself busy. He threw himself into volunteering at the animal shelter, finding solace in helping other animals with stories as heartbreaking as Chance's. Walking dogs, comforting frightened cats, and working alongside the shelter staff gave John a sense of purpose. His routine remained intact, but the house still felt empty. He missed the sound of Chance's paws on the hardwood floor, the gentle thud of his tail against the furniture, and the way Chance would nuzzle his hand for comfort. Every corner of the house seemed to whisper memories of their time together. One sunny afternoon, as John tended to his rose garden, he heard a familiar bark. Startled, he looked up to see Sarah and Mark walking toward him, Chance trotting happily by their side. His heart swelled as Chance, now healthier and more confident, bounded toward him. "Chance," John called, kneeling as the dog leaped into his arms. Chance licked his face with joyful enthusiasm, his tail wagging furiously. John buried his face in Chance's soft fur, feeling tears of happiness welling up in his eyes. "We thought it was time for a visit," Sarah said with a warm smile. "He's been doing so well. But we know he misses you." Over coffee on John's porch, Sarah and Mark shared stories of Chance's new life. He had taken to their home beautifully, enjoying their large backyard and quiet evenings by the fireplace. They told John about Chance's first swim at a nearby lake, his newfound love for chasing squirrels, and the way he snuggled with them on the couch during movie nights. "He's part of our family now," Mark said, looking at Chance with affection. "But I think he'll always see you as his first home." John smiled, his heart brimming with gratitude. Seeing Chance so happy and well-loved affirmed that he had made the right decision, no matter how difficult it had been. As the afternoon sun began to set, Sarah and Mark prepared to leave. John knelt down to give Chance one final hug. "Be good, Chance," he whispered, stroking his fur. You'll always have a place in my heart. Chance licked John's hand. His eyes filled with love and understanding. Watching them drive away, John felt a sense of peace. The quiet house didn't feel quite so lonely anymore. John continued to stay in touch with Sarah and Mark, receiving updates and photos of Chance's adventures. These glimpses into Chance's new life brought him joy and reassurance, reminding him that love and resilience could create profound change. Over time, John's life expanded in other ways. He grew closer to his neighbors, became an active member of the community, and spent more time with his grandchildren. Chance's story had inspired him to embrace life with an open heart. And though their paths had diverged, the lessons of love, empathy, and second chances remained with him forever.